welcome back. And we are moving into our first conversation for this morning as we get an update as to what is happening in the Chiquibul. We have with us representatives of the Friends for Conservation and Development, also known as FCD. And we have the Executive Director, Raphael Manzanero. In the middle, we have Esther Sanchez, who is the Program Director, and Derrick Chan on the end, who is the Park Manager. Good morning, and welcome.
Good morning.
And thank you for making that very long drive this morning through the thick fog.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, we take the opportunity, of course, to get information from you as to what is taking place at our border in our largest protected area. And we know that you work very diligently in being able to do your work, but also keep the public informed. I want to start off with what seems to be one of the more pressing issues. Raphael, you have been sounding the alarm. FCD has been sounding the alarm on cattle ranching for quite some time. And this year, you're really starting off trying to have people understand how critical this issue is. Why is that? And what is the situation?
Well, last year, we actually started a program under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in terms of getting finances in order for us really to look at the agricultural expansion along the western border or the western flank of the Chiquibul. But apart from that, through the Ministry of Forestry, that's with Dr. Omar Figueroa, the Minister of Forestry, he also granted us the endorsement for us to cover a wider area of that western border, inclusive of the Vaca Forest Reserve and then of the Columbia River Forest Reserve. So in reality, whenever we started to look at some 89 kilometers of the western border, we realized that cattle ranching and agricultural farming is not only contained or is occurring within the Chiquibul forest. It is also occurring right all along that western flank. Yeah. So for us, it of course was a big surprise because I think we have been concentrating our efforts in terms of the Chiquibul, of course, because that's really our main area of administration with the Forest Department. But in the area, for example, of the Vaca Forest Reserve, it really has been a high level of degradation, taking place in there. Now, unlike the Chiquibul, in the Vaca Forest Reserve, there would be a mix of Belizeans and Guatemalans probably involved in the degradation of that forest, which makes it rather more complicated on one way. In the Columbia River, it might be possible that there could also be a mix of individuals involved in terms of cattle and also in terms of agricultural farming. But I think it's important also to note that because this occurs right along the western border, it is rather difficult for us to go and put really our boots on the ground in that zone. If we were to do that, then we always will count with the Belize Defense Force and the Police Department. And those our most recent communications have been really to start to engage more with the Belize Defense Force. They basically have already encouraged us and have felt that yes, it is something that they would want to look even much more closer as we start now really to look at the wider spectrum of that landscape. So that is really the situation for what we are seeing. It's also key to note that agricultural farming has been one that we have been discussing from for quite some time.
Yes.
And in fact, from 1984, so from the early 1980s, there have been this sort of agricultural farming taking within and occurring within the national territory. But cattle ranching is a new one.
Yes.
But cattle ranching is a new trend. And what really makes it very different is the fact that cattle ranching will not probably be done by the poor farmers. These are really more organized, much more, I guess, wealthy individuals who are involved on this. And so, we are looking at new elements. I mean, Derrick is the one who basically flies along the western flank of these protected areas. So he has been able now to analyze, the data, and what we are showing then is somewhat, a big surprise even for us.
Usually when you think of threats to the Chiquibul, I know personally one of the first things that pop in my mind is gold panning. But so how detrimental is cattle ranching to the Chiquibul?
And the fact is that, cattle ranching, as we can see it in the context of Guatemala, Guatemala has, and in fact, the Petén area depends a lot on that economy of cattle ranching. Cattle ranching is considered to be the main threat for the degradation of their forests in Petén. And so we know that as we start really to get that sign and that trend in Belize, more than likely it really can increase. Illicit activities in terms of cattle ranching or the movement of cattle is, of course, big. In 2016, just a year ago or so, there was a report that was done which basically indicates that over 1 million cattle are illegally moved into Mexico, from Belize, from Guatemala and Honduras. So there's a big economy behind this. Yeah. And of course, people are trying to find lands where to put pastures and where to put cattle. And so for us, even though it is really a trend that is just evolving, but we need really to contain it before it really cannot be done again. And so, that is really our outcry that we have been seeing, for quite some time.
Yeah. In fact, you have spoken of the example coming out of Mexico of how cattle ranching is very often suspected to be linked to organized crime. And that has been a major concern with the increase in cattle ranching at our borders. What are some of the things that you would do when you encounter, if you do a flyover and you see, I see from the report there were 14 confirmed pastures. What happens after you are able to recognize that these pastures are indeed in Belizean territory?
Okay, well, there should be a process, right? And that's stipulated in the confidence building measures.
Yes.
It has to be confirmed or verified by the OAS, and then it should be removed. But it's the technology is so advanced nowadays that you know when you are within 1 meter of an area. So if I take a GPS, like out there in the street, and I tell you we are right here, we pull out a map in Google, I tell you we're right here, and that's where we are. There is your margin of error could be 1 meter or 2 meters. So we don't have to really wait. The OAS they can verify that quick too.
Yeah.
Right? They have the technology. They should. If they don't, they should. And then we should be able to act within 7 days. Not a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years,
And what's the compliance usually like if you find these pastures? Are the people usually willing to just up and move? How does that work?
No, they won't. They won't. You won't find them, right?
Oh, okay.
And what happens? I think it's a little bit difficult in terms of to addressing cattle, because what has been done is that pasture is vicious, right? You cannot destroy pasture so easy, right? The only thing that can destroy pasture is the cattle himself. But pasture will just grow, and if you put fire to it, you make it healthier.
Yeah.
Right. So fire is part of the ecology of pasture, right? So and then the pastures are just being created, and then people come putting their fences year after, right? Or sometimes they don't. We have seen some areas where the cattle are just put in there, and in the evening they are put back, right, to a fence in Guatemala.
Okay.
So it's sort of like a hunter, like a chatero. He goes and then he comes back home. He lives in Guatemala. So it's a thing that you have to monitor, and you have to have different strategies of how you're gonna address this, right? It's not just like
you just go there and find
it. It's just you just won't go and root it out and take it and it's gone. No, it's a thing of strategy and monitoring and consistency.
And not as simple as removing a structure.
Yeah.
So what are some of the efforts that you are in discussion with? Obviously, you work very closely with the BDF. You are in close communication. They're in close communication with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which then ties into the OAS. What is the communication about being able to address this issue?
My understanding is that the reports in terms of the aerial reconnaissance, in terms of the analysis that has already been done, that has already been studied, that has already been reviewed. And also I understand that the government is already in communication with the OAS, which is, as how Derrick mentioned, that is one of the first steps really to do in terms of getting a verification on the ground. Because we certainly need really to reassure ourselves that that cattle is within Belizean territory. And because it is very close to the border, you will see pastures that are coming, from Guatemala into Belize, but it can go as far as 1.5 kilometers within the Belizean territory. But nevertheless, it still has to be verified. And of course, the owner, is it a Belizean owner or is it a Guatemalan owner? In the case of Chiquibul, it's much more simpler for us. We actually have already documented this, so we know these are purely Guatemalans. In Vaca, it's a little bit much more complicated, but it needs to be really verified. So our expectation is that, as that is verified, then certainly then the point will be how to remove that cattle. So either to cut the fences. I think that has already been indicated by the BDF, in terms of doing that action, in terms of just cutting, and either the cattle will just find their own homes. Because in order to bring the cattle in, it's not easy. I mean, these things are jungles. I mean, it's not like you are behind a farm, farmland. So, but it's really one of those things that we need really to demonstrate. We need to reassure that there is the following up of those procedures, in order not really to get into any problems in Guatemala.
Yeah. So there is communication, and there are some efforts being made and considerations as to what they may do to address the situation.
I mean, that's what I understand. Yes.
So that people can really understand this clearly, what is the biggest threat of the cattle ranching? Is it the expansion of the pastures? Is it the increase of inflows of Guatemalans utilizing Belizean land? What is the biggest threat that we're looking at here?
Well, it's as we said before on the last show that we were here in Belize. Is that first we have the campesinos, the poor farmer. He comes and clear forest, right? And then he passes this to someone else. He either sells it or pass it on to someone, and then cattle, right? They will put pasture and cattle. So what we have seen in the last 5 years, right? And we have the images and the data to see this here. Most of the campesinos, which is, let's say, the poor farmer that is planting his corn and his pumpkin, they're gone. Everything has been replaced by cattle, right? So now the campesinos are going to move in deeper, or maybe they will go away. We don't know. But the cattle is, they're more permanent, right? Cattle is established and it's put right there. And of course, we're talking about expansion of agriculture, either cattle or crops. It's in the Chiquibul. It's a national park. It's illegal. The Guatemalans are illegal, of course. So the threat just keeps going. Fire becomes another threat. Yes. So it's just increasing, and it's just
I think the point is that, as how Derrick noted, we are dealing then with people who have much more a higher economy. In other words, they have more finances. Once again, in Petén, in a period of 3 years, the CONAP, which is like the forest department in Guatemala, it took them 3 years basically to recover 110,000 hectares. You know how much that is? That's about 250,000 acres of forest. So you're looking at big expanses of land that basically cattle ranchers would use. Up until now, they still have not been able to eradicate that problem. It's still there. Over the last 4 governments, they have tried really to push out the cattle ranchers, and they still have not been able to do it. So the point here is that, once they have a grip on the land,
it's hard to remove them.
If it has been rather difficult for us on how really to deal with the chateros, for example, then you are dealing with other kind of bigger elements. And so we have to be much more kind of organized, systematic in terms of dealing with this particular issue.
So it's more important to start when the problem is relatively small,
That's correct,
rather
right,
than
right.
to wait till
Yeah.
it's,
Exactly.
it's like a forest fire that you're
Yeah.
dealing
Exactly.
with here.
That's right.
The common saying,
Yeah.
prevention is better than cure.
No, but what I wanted to ask is, how does our relationship with Guatemala affect your mission to protect the Chiquibul from whether it be the gold panning, the incursions, or cattle ranching?
We actually have done over the last 10 years, since the beginning of our work in Chiquibul, we basically started a binational program. In fact, many of the things that we have addressed all throughout those years, starting from shate activity, going with illegal logging, dealing even with gold panning, poaching, illegal wildlife trafficking of scarlet macaws, we have been able to synergize many of our interventions with the Guatemalans.
Okay.
Cattle ranching would probably be one of the other areas. I would believe that because the Guatemalans have learned so much in terms of how to deal with cattle ranching and their problems in Guatemala, there is a big room in terms of also learning the authorities here on how to deal with this. Because they actually have passed through a lot of these issues. Cattle ranching is one that it requires, in fact, in one of the documents, they developed a strategy on how to combat the cattle ranching in Guatemala. A national strategy on how to deal with this, with 6, key, strategies on how really to intervene and be able to control it. And that was started by 2011. So they have actually been ongoing with a full strategy over the last 6 years or so.
Yeah. So there are lessons to be
Yeah.
learned.
There's a lot of lessons
And in
to be
fact,
learned,
you've had
yeah.
very good relationships with environmental agencies and the Forest Department on the Guatemalan side
That's correct,
for
correct.
quite some time. Let's move into your the details of your annual report for 2017. You were able to expand your programs. You have gotten additional support. Let's talk about some of the things that you're proud of for 2017.
Well, one of the key things that basically has occurred in the Chiquibul in terms of last year, it was of course the activation of another conservation post, which was the Caballo CP. Also, it is to be noted that for the first time now we have Forest Department staff on one CP. Which is good news for us, because we have also been saying this, that in order really to control and to address the matters on the ground, we have to join forces.
Yes.
The Belize has limited resources, so the more that we can combine efforts, then of course the better. So that was part of the Chiquibul Forest Investment Initiative. The second thing, which was really critical to us in terms of a new development, was once again our re-entry into the Vaca Forest Reserve. We actually had left that zone for 2 years because of finances. We returned back again in 2017 as a full-fledged program back again. And Esther is pretty much also, has been working, more specifically with the ground teams there. But that was really a sort of a new, program that we started back again. It is a little bit kind of unique because we are dealing with the human dimension and the environmental protection.
Yeah.
It is a model that the Forest Department has wanted really to promote in terms of the use of the land in a sustainable manner, in this case by farmers. Farmers from Benqueviejo, from Arenal, and Socots. And that's where Esther can probably be able to indicate a little bit
So
more.
tell us about the programs in Vaca.
Well, one might wonder, as SPCD, we are co-managing the Chiquibul National Park, and why the Vaca? Well, the Vaca actually, the purpose of the Vaca, or the goal of the Vaca, is actually to serve as a buffer for the Chiquibul. So it is our interest to know what is happening there and to have at least some type of support in the area. We have been working, we have a full staff there of 3 persons working in the area doing monitoring. Again, we are not a regulatory agency in the area. That is a role of the Forest Department, but as our support in the area, working along with the farmers, our personnel then are dealing or working directly with farmers in the area in promoting agroecological practices. We talk about agroecology, we are in a protected area, so we want to make sure that whatever practices they are doing is done in a way that one is not detrimental to the environment. We're trying to reduce as well, or at least limit the expansion of the clearings and deforestation in the area.
Yes.
That's important for us, and also for the farmers to be able to learn new methods and technologies on what they can use to be able to produce in a smaller area. So over the past year, since we re-entered back into the Vaca Forest Reserve, we've been working with a group of farmers, and they are actually organizing themselves, and they call themselves the Friends of Vaca Forest Reserve. These farmers are all Belizean farmers, but they do have an area within the reserve where they are operating, or they're occupying those. And so they have been going through a process. I think initially we've been working on developing their farm plans so that they themselves can really look at what is it that they want to do in the area, and to make sure then that, again, it is directed to what is accepted and what is the best practices in the area. So we have been doing that. We have been also working pilot projects in different areas within the agroecological scope. So that's pretty much what we have been working there. It hasn't been as easy, particularly when you work with humans.
Yeah.
It's not the same, right?
I was going to ask, because what was the process like engaging farmers into putting together a plan before venturing into the farm itself?
Well, I guess it's just the approach has a lot to do with it.
Yes.
I think the initial work in doing that extension work with them and having them realize that plans can be something that you plan an event, plan a family, and also the farm, right? It doesn't have to be something sophisticated done only by persons working in organizations. And so at that level, using also methodologies that have worked in other areas in Central America with rural farmers, that's pretty much the approach that we have been taking. So it has been, for some, well, one thing I think that we have learned is that whenever you have one and it works with them, it's easier then to work with others who might be more,
Because
probably
they
held
have
back.
that example
Right,
to draw
right,
upon.
and even not just in the farm planning, but also in the implementation of pilot projects.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that as well. So it's been, I think, a learning experience. It's been moving, but we're moving forward. And I think by the mere fact that the group now is organized, they're trying to re-register themselves as a cooperative, is already a positive way. Our vision and our hope has always been that eventually they will be able to take up part of that management of their area that they are working in the reserve.
Now, we don't want to miss what I think is a very critical point here, which is the Vaca is a reserve. It's a
Right.
forest reserve. And you are allowing for Belizeans to be able to utilize it to farm and create a source of income for themselves. This is perhaps, it seems very counterintuitive based on what people tend to believe about conservation in general.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that this is going to be something sustainable, that it won't become where you lose more of the forest in the process?
I think like you rightly mentioned, it is a unique case, and it's not the ideal case. Ideally, for a protected area, you would prefer no humans to actually be in there. But given the situation, I think we have to look at it and see where really we can work along with the people. I think the fact that they are being organized and they have that guidance by an organization such as FCD, the Forest Department is also involved and in meeting with them and just through information sharing as well. So I think that part has being able to work along with them, to guide them, and to be able to have them really understand their role. Like I said earlier, it's not always easy because some might have that idea, but others might not. So we have to make sure that through the strengthening of that community group that they have, that they will be able to set also their internal rules and regulations that will guide what they can and cannot do in the reserve, and that would go along with what is allowed by the Forest Department.
And how did they receive the new methods, and were they willing participants? What was that like?
There were, I think since FCD was there a while ago, there were some methods that are already being transmitted. I think the difference now is that we have much more that being accompanying them along the process. Okay. So because of that, then we actually don't just teach them, we work along with them to make sure they show, they go learn and so on. So the presence of having a field technician out there is really key in ensuring then that they have that support and being able to see. I mean, just talking to farmers, and then being able to listen to how their production has increased in a smaller contained areas, such as using cover structures and using more of that organic fertilizer, makes a big difference. So I think them being able to practice it now makes them be able to also convince themselves that it is working.
It's a great education tool as well.
Yeah.
Because we know farming is a traditional practice, so when they pass it on, they'll have all the information about sustainability and using these organic processes. What kind of plants are they growing?
Well, they are actually, we have different groups of farmers. We have those that are involved in livestock production, maybe small stack, or some even have some heads of cattle. So with them, we are working on doing some like protein banks where they can grow their food and prepare their food in a more enclosed area rather than expanding and doing more pastures. So that's one of the approaches we're doing with the cattle, with the livestock producers. Then we have those who are doing more of the vegetable. So with them, then we're doing cover structures, we're doing improved irrigation systems so that they can actually maximize the efficient use of water, doing the fertilizers, doing more of the natural systems there for their farms.
Yeah.
So then we would have the two different groups that we're working with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a couple of points
And then we have
on this also is that Vaca is a buffer to the Chiquibul forest. So that's why we also are keenly interested. Even though Chiquibul is so huge, but it still requires a buffer.
Yes.
And the buffer in this case is the Vaca Forest Reserve. It is over 30,000 acres of forest. But also as critically important in terms of people to understand. Conservation basically in the common language basically means to have something for the longest term, the greater good for the greater number of people. So in reality, villages who are living close to natural resources, of course they can be custodians of these things. And of course they can use those resources, but the question is how to do it. To do it in a sustainable way for the longest term once again, for the greater amount of good and for the greater number of people. Yeah. So that practice is pretty much in the landscape management that is occurring in the Vaca. And so it is really a vibrant one. Ultimately it would really be great. And the model is that if the local people can be able to embrace that stewardship program and they themselves become another FCD on the ground. Because we cannot do everything, and we need all of those efforts on the ground.
You're building advocates.
Exactly, that's correct.
Now, last year was actually the official 10th anniversary for Friends for Conservation and Development, and I think listening to the information that you've brought over the years, we know that there are seasonal changes within the Chiquibul itself. What are some of the threats that we're looking at this time?
Well, we already have discussed about cattle ranching, we already have discussed about agricultural farming. And the other one, only to add that would be, of course, gold panning. You had mentioned about that. The gold panning has been one of those that over the last 7 years, we have been actively trying to contain this. We still have not been able really to contain that matter. Of course, people will wonder, well, why? Well, that's a good question because we have tried really to pump it. In fact, after 1 year, since the evolution of this issue in southern Chiquibul, a conservation post was installed, which was the Ceibo Chico conservation post. The problem is that Guatemalans keep on changing their tactics. These areas are really a distant zone. Even only to bring out a person from there who is detained, goodness, that's really something really to consider how we're going to do it safely, so that this person can reach in court before the 48 hours is over. So all of this creates a lot of complications. But gold panning is basically the other third issue that is.
And we have seen, or we've heard cases very often that they tend to be very confrontational, which increases the threats for your rangers as well. Now, my question is, are we seeing the same number of people coming in to try to extract gold from our land, or is it a growing number of persons coming over?
It changes, it varies. Sometimes we have seen that different times of the year, like the groups increase. Sometimes when we put like a lot of pressure, they stop working for a month maybe, but it varies. And generally, there's like about 5 communities that have the impact, that people from those 5 villages come to do the gold panning for the most part.
Well, it must be lucrative if they
Yeah.
keep on coming back for 7
Yeah.
years.
But the damage they do is, big, really
Well,
big. Yeah.
the fact is that, it's, once again, we go back to the sort of the base. I mean, what's really the basis of all of these things? The foundation is, it's actually poverty in these communities. But if you recall what we were mentioning earlier, cattle ranching versus now the poor community guys, I mean, this is completely different.
Yes.
So on one hand, we are looking at the poor campesinos, the poor farmers, who are going to come in really to find the gold. Now, Belizeans might tend to think that you go with a bucket and you get a full bucket, but it doesn't happen like that.
It's not that much.
So actually, Guatemalans, at the end of the day, for working, for 3 days with fours, in terms of 4 individuals working as a small group, they might end up, just getting about 2 grams on what they call basically 2 grams of gold. And the 2 grams of gold might be about $120, $140. If you break that into the number of days and with the number of people, you end up like $20 a piece or so. So why do they do it? Will Belizeans go and do this? Of course not. These things are distant areas.
Yeah.
So Guatemalans would basically do it, so the terminology of being lucrative, for them, it's still money.
Yeah.
They can still survive with that.
Yeah.
So they will continuously be coming. And I've said before that, the gold existing on the main headwaters, certainly, it is not really that easy now to get it. But I believe that, we continuously have to be there in terms of deterring this. If not, the Guatemalans will leave that zone until all the gold is finished from that area.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask is how dangerous is it for the Chiquibul? Because it takes about 3 days work to get 2 grams of gold. So how detrimental is that to the Chiquibul? Just personally, from the sound of it, it doesn't sound like much. So why is it so concerning?
I think what is really concerning is, and this has been really, really difficult for us really to bring in the story home.
Yeah.
We have tried, but perhaps not successfully. But if you go to the area, you will be amazed. You might tend to think that a bulldozer passed through there.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is just destroying the main headwater. This is where the water really starts for the Western Maya Mountains. So that is really the danger, and all the garbage, the debris that is going in there. So imagine yourself that you are basically standing in an area which was pretty much pristine, and you appear there in the next 2 days and everything is just completely messed up already.
So they have to dig in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
sift it through in the water itself. And
But-
because they're living next to the water, they have everything that they use to survive for those days, right?
But I like your question because, when you ask a question, it's because you don't understand it, right? And you'll be surprised because really, a minister asks that question.
Yeah.
Well, what's the problem?
Yeah.
What's the problem? These guys are destroying our watershed, and they are littering this place. They are setting fires. We don't see it. I've always said this: taxi man, a street vendor, or bank teller, they don't see it. They don't understand. I understand what you're asking, and it's good to ask those questions because really there's a big problem out there, right?
And I think
when
that's the point we need to get home, that
it's just like if I would ask you, so what's the problem with the garbage along the city here?
Yeah.
I don't see a problem. There is a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
There's a big problem, right? But you don't see.
No,
right?
because
So
you don't
it's-
even consider the process,
Yeah.
We don't know the
Yeah, we
process.
don't know the process. I know it's hard work, but you don't realize what all it entails and what all it does to the environment. So that's really the point I think that needs to be emphasized.
And I
Yeah.
think the human footprint also in terms of getting people, and that's why the shutter activity was really, really a major detriment to the jungles
Yeah.
of Chiquibul, because the more that people go farther distant under the jungle, they will do more things. In other words, the extraction of the chattel leaf was not really that bad, It was the domino effect behind that particular extraction program. In other words, the forest fires, the hunting, the archaeological looting, all of these things, which accompanies the person who is traveling under the jungle. So, for example, the gold panner is going to put fire in the jungles. We had not really seen forest fires in the deeper part of the Chiquibul because that's mainly broadleaf forest. And then over the last 3 years, we started to see this kind of forest fires, and nobody's going to fight that.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Not even the best, firefighters can fight this kind of fires down in Chiquibul. So you just have to leave it there until the rains will come. So it's changing also, it's transforming the landscape in a way. And then, of course, poaching. As soon, the longer that people are going under the jungle, they will depend then on the local
other
products.
opportunities.
Exactly, other opportunities. So it's really all of this kind of thing. Now, how to bring in a dollar figure? It's really difficult. We have tried. Like, for example, how do we put a dollar figure to the contaminants or the contamination or the losses in terms of a watershed? If you ask us, we don't know it. And that's probably part of our problem, because we have not been able to bring in the numbers,
And I think with that too, you might not see the effect right now, but
later
down the road,
yeah.
that's where you will really suffer the consequences of the activities happening now.
Yeah. And you've also spoken of erosion as well, because of their work next to the watersheds as well. So looking at all the threats that are continuous in the Chiquibul, and moving past your 10th official year of work, what is your goal moving forward as FCD? Do you want to concentrate your focus, or are you still trying to spread yourself as thin as possible to address all these issues?
We actually have realized that, last year we developed our strategic plan.
Yeah.
Our strategic plan, it basically gives us the magnitude of that work, not only to cover the Chiquibul forest, but also to be vigilant on the Western Maya Mountains. It doesn't really mean that we have to be co-managers of the entire thing, but we need really to look at the other areas. If you look at the mountain pine ridge, almost nobody speaks about the mountain pine ridge forest reserve. The Vaca, the Sibun, all of these areas, basically. So the Western Maya Mountains is pretty much a part of, the larger scale of what is left in Belize in terms of a broadleaf forest. So our mandate is really more to look also as a vigilant in terms of looking at what really is occurring there. Based to galvanize more interest, groups. And because even though if we protect, solely the Chiquibul and all the rest is gone, you cannot exist as an island. You really need really the bigger block. So that is for one. The last 10 years also has brought us a lot of lessons learned. If there is something that pretty much is of the utmost importance to us, is really all of those things that we have learned. Over the last 10 years, whenever we start to excise all these years, we certainly have been able to pass through a lot, and a lot of interventions. We have hit walls, we come back again, we try something else, and it just goes on. So in a way, we have become much more, I think, much more strong. We have become much more mature for sure because of all these things. I would hope also that in the very near future we're going to start really to also take out some of these techniques that we have done, to share it with other groups, with other organizations, because environmentalism is becoming much more complicated. It's not the same like over the last 10, 20 years. So I think that is the other thing that we are looking at in terms of sharing some of this knowledge and some of the lessons learned. Our staff has increased, of course.
Yes.
We started with 5 guys. Now we are 31 individuals at FCD.
Yeah.
Of course, fundraising is always a stress, because we always have to figure out how we are going to really get the dollar in order really to pay for the services on the ground. We also have come about with a lot of partners, and that I think is perhaps what has lessened really the burden on us because of all the multiple people. Marlene, you were a part of the Telethon, if you recall on that, So, all of these, we have been able to galvanize a lot of the interest from, from different age groups, from children to youth and to adults. And that, I think, is a novel thing really to get, because it builds us really much more that we have to keep on in due diligence also. So it's not only the finances that people give us, but by itself it gives us also that we have to do always the right thing as best as we can. And so I think we also do it in terms of our own responsibility also as a co-manager.
Yes.
As a co-manager of the Chiquibul National Park, really to see these things. That's why we signed the agreement. We have passed through actually 2 agreements. We are entering our 3rd agreement. Our agreements go for 5 years, basically. So every 5 years, we are also crossing our fingers that the government is going to give us back to sign it, But, it's something that as NGOs, as an NGO, and I'm pretty sure there are many other NGOs all around, from Tide and many, Belize Audubon, I mean, the only thing that we do as an NGO is really to provide a service. I mean, that's what we do. We provide a service to Belize in this case. And so for us, I mean, having the Chiquibul as the largest protected area, it's a lot of responsibility, and we have to share this, also all along. And so our partners really have come to this, and we are extremely grateful for that, because if it was not for them and the donors, of course, like PACT, many others, that has helped us actually tremendously.
Yeah. And I just have one final question, because we're quickly running out of time. Going from 5 rangers, and I can imagine 5 people coming together, you share the same passion, to 31. You really have to ensure that all these people have the same passion, the same willingness to be able to do the work that was started with just 5. What is it like now, having that many people? And it's still not enough. I'm very well aware of that. I don't want to give that impression. But ensuring that everybody is delivering the same quality of work that you are committed to doing.
I mean, that's a very good question. And as a director, of course, I would worry about that one also, because, I mean, mindful that we started in 1989. And so, we have been discussing our succession for a couple of years now. And so Esther is a part of that succession, I believe, because, and she can reckon that one of the key things that we have been asking for always from our staff is basically those ground rules, I mean, the ground principles. And it's really the work ethics also, which is very important to us. And also the character. The character is very critical to us. So, FCD is a character institution. We study this, and also a learning institution. But more so, I think, we come also from a very small community. We come from San Jose Socot. So, I mean, Derrick comes from there. I come from there. I mean, actually, the founders come from the small community. And so how do we really venture then really to go as an organization with a lot of people from many villages? Our thought then is the mentorship program. Part of my role today is to mentor, my staff, and that is probably where now I'm actually more moving to, in terms of building those values, because there is still a lot of work that is left there, in terms of the Western Maya Mountains, and so I believe that these will be the guys who are going to take it over then, immediately. So that is really part of the game plan, and the selection process is very much, very close to us. I mean, the screening process of people, either from a ranger, from a field assistant to a researcher, all of these basically pass through those kind of the rules in terms of following the principles and the foundations of the FCD. And that probably is perhaps the magic in terms of then moving into the future for that.
Well, we want to say thank you for coming in this morning, and thank you for the work that you do as well, and always ensuring that no matter what, you ensure you come all the way to Belize City, or at times we meet you there, to ensure that all Belizeans know exactly what is taking place at our western border. So thank you very much.
We want to give you guys thanks as well. So we brought as a token of our appreciation for the support. It's not always easy to share information on what we are doing, and so we wanted to award this FCD champion to Channel 5 for the support and for all the effort as well that you guys do in
thank you.
Sharing our work, sharing our likes, sharing the good and the bad.
We appreciate it very much, and of course,
that's mahogany from Chiquibul.
Nice.
And slate from Sokot.
Okay.
This is legally extracted, right?
It's actually salvage that we had to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And as we mentioned, I think here at Channel 5, the CEO recognizes the work that FCD does in the Chiquibul, and it trickles down into our news reports and here on Open Your Eyes and all our other programs. So, of course, we will continue to follow you as long as you'll be providing the information and perhaps a bit of rangers to get us to the Chiquibul when we get there. Right, Derrick?
That's right.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead now, though, and take a break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about jaguar protection. That's coming up after the break.